The sky over the plains had a hard look to it, the kind that made a man feel small even if he had ridden 1,000 miles and lived through 100 rough nights. The clouds sat low and heavy, rolling like dark river water turned upside down, and the wind kept changing its mind. Grass bent one way, then another, whispering in long, nervous waves. Out here, a person could vanish without anyone noticing, swallowed by distance, dust, and the quiet that came after hope ran thin. A lone rider moved across that open land as if he were the last thing left that still had a purpose. His horse picked its steps through the tall grass, head down, ears turning to catch the first warning in the air. The man in the saddle kept one hand near the reins and the other loose at his side, not reaching for trouble, not hiding from it either. His hat brim cut a narrow shadow over his face, and the line of his jaw looked like it had been taught to hold steady through bad weather and worse news. Folks in the old west town called him a drifter, but that word never fit right. Drifters wandered without weight. This man carried something heavy, even if no one could see it. He had a name once that mattered to someone, and a place once that felt like more than a dot on a map. Now he rode forgotten trails because the work of living did not end just because a heart got tired. He had been headed toward the creek for water when he saw the shape of a cabin far ahead, hunched low and crooked against the wide sky. It was no town, no ranch house with lights in the windows and a dog in the yard. It was one of those small places a person built when the world left them no better choice. The boards looked weathered gray, patched with whatever could be found. The roof sagged and strips of cloth flapped from the porch posts like torn flags. Then he saw movement above it. A woman was up on the roof, braced against the wind like she meant to wrestle the sky itself. Her dress was plain and worn, the kind that had seen too many washings and too little rest. Her hair had come loose from its pins, dark strands whipping across her face. One bare foot pressed into the shingles for balance, and in her hand she lifted a hammer, not as a tool alone, but as a promise that she would not let her home fall apart without a fight. The man slowed his horse and watched. He had meant to pass by. A person learned to mind their own business out here, because every doorstep had its troubles and every stranger carried a story that could burn you. But something in the woman's posture held him. It was not helplessness. It was stubborn life, the kind that did not ask for pity. The wind rose again, stronger, snapping the cloth and pulling at the cabin as if it wanted to peel it open. The clouds shifted, and for a moment he saw the far edge of the storm, a pale curtain of rain dragging across the plain. Lightning flickered inside the dark like a warning lantern. A low moan rolled over the land, not thunder yet, but the sound a storm made when it was gathering courage. The woman drove a nail, then another, arm shaking with effort. She looked down once toward the empty grass, as if she expected someone who never came. She turned her face toward the clouds, eyes narrowed, jaw set. The man could not hear her words, but he could read them anyway. Not today, not this roof. Not my last piece of shelter. He nudged his horse forward. When he got close enough, he called out, keeping his voice calm so it would not spook her. "Miss, that sky's fixing to turn mean." She glanced over, and for a heartbeat she looked like she might throw the hammer. Her eyes were sharp, and they held the kind of fear that had been used too many times and had learned to dress itself up as anger. She did not look away first. "I can see the sky," she called back. "And I can see a man who ought to be riding on." He could have taken that as an answer and left. He had done that before. He had ridden away from hard faces and sharp words because it was easier than stepping into a life that was already breaking. But he looked at the cabin again, at the torn cloth and the leaning porch, and at the way her hands kept working even as the wind tried to tear her down. "I ain't aiming to bother you," he said. "But that wind'll lift you clean off that roof if it gets worse? You got someone inside?" Her mouth tightened. "No, just that. No," like it was an old word she was tired of saying. Then he heard it, faint beneath the wind, the thin cry of a child. It came from inside the cabin, quick and uncertain, like a small animal trapped in fear. The woman flinched, and for the first time her strong mass cracked enough to show what lay beneath it. "He's scared," she said, more to herself than to him. "Then come down," the man replied. "Storm's coming fast." She hesitated, eyes flicking toward the horizon. The clouds there were darker, thicker, and something hung from them like a rope of shadow reaching toward the earth. The air smelled of damp dust. Her fingers tightened around the hammer handle. "I can't," she said. "If the roof goes, we got nothing." The man felt an old ache in his chest, the kind that came when he saw a fight that was too big for one person but still had to be fought. He swung down from the saddle and tied his horse to a porch post that looked like it might snap. He stepped closer, lifting his hands so she could see he carried no threat. "Let me," he called. "You go tend your young'uns?" Her eyes narrowed again. "You don't even know me." "That's true," he said. "But I know that sky. And I know what it does to folks who think they can stand alone against it." For a moment the world held its breath, waiting on her choice. The wind eased, then returned in a hard gust that rattled the cabin walls. The woman's dress snapped against her legs and she dropped to one knee to keep from sliding. That decided it. She crawled toward the roof edge and lowered the hammer down first. He caught it, then reached up. Her hand was calloused, warm despite the cold wind, and when he helped her down, she landed close enough that he could see the tired lines at the corners of her eyes. She smelled like smoke and sun and the plain soap a person used when there was nothing fancy left in the world. "Don't go thinking this makes us friends," she said, though her voice softened on the last word like she did not quite believe her own warning. "I won't," he replied. "What's your name?" She paused, as if names had become dangerous to give. "Lark," she said at last. It was an unusual name, but it suited her. A lark was a small thing that still sang against a wide sky. He nodded. "I'm Call." That was not the full of it, not the story behind it, but it was enough for now. Another child's voice rose inside, a whimper this time, and Lark's head turned quick. "Stay close," she told him, then stepped into the cabin. Call climbed onto the porch roof and looked up at the damage. Old boards had lifted at the edges, nails pulled loose. Someone had patched it with tar cloth and hope. He worked fast, driving nails, tightening what he could. The hammer felt steady in his hand, even as the wind tried to slap it away. His hat nearly flew once, and he caught it with a muttered curse. From the roof he could see more than the cabin. Far off, a dark column touched down where the storm met the land. It was not fully formed yet, but it had the shape of trouble, twisting and growing, dragging dust and grass up into the sky. The sound of it was low and hungry, like a giant breathing through clenched teeth. Call swallowed. He had seen twisters before. Men talked about them in saloons, like they were tall tailies meant to scare greenhorns. But there was nothing tall-tale about that moving shadow on the plain. He worked harder. Inside the cabin, he heard Lark speaking in a low voice. He caught a few words through the cracks. "Hush now, I'm here. Hold on to your brother." "No, don't look at the window." The words hit him strange. Brother, so there was more than one. He drove another nail and tried not to think about small hands clinging to each other in the dark. A flash of lightning lit the world white for a breath, and thunder followed, closer now. Rain began as scattered drops, then thickened into a hard slant driven sideways. It stung Call's face and soaked his shirt through. The boards under him grew slick. He shifted his weight and kept going, because stopping was not a choice. When he finished the last nail he could reach, he slid down and grabbed the torn cloth hanging from the porch. He wrapped it tighter around a post, knotting it like he had learned tying loads in freight yards long ago. The wind yanked at it, but it held for the moment. He stepped to the cabin door and knocked once, then pushed it open. The inside was dim, smelling of damp wood, old flour, and a fire that had been kept alive with scraps. 2 children huddled near the hearth, one small boy with wide eyes and dirty cheeks, and a girl a little older with her arms around him. Their clothes were patched and thin. Their faces were too serious for their age, like they had learned early that the frontier did not hand out mercy. Lark stood between them and the door as if she meant to block the whole world with her body. In the weak light, Call saw a bruise on her forearm and a healing cut near her temple, half hidden by loose hair. She saw him notice and her shoulders stiffened. "You got what you need done?" she asked. "For now," he said. The cabin shuddered under a new gust. The girl squeaked and tightened her hold on the boy. The boy's eyes fixed on Call's hat, and then on the hammer at his side, as if he could not decide if this stranger was a help or a new kind of danger. Call kept his hands visible. "Storm's worse than I thought. That twister's down." Lark's face drained of color. She moved to the window and lifted the curtain just enough to look. The light outside had turned sickly, a strange greenish gray that made everything seem unreal. "Lord," she whispered. Call watched her hands tremble for the first time. She lowered the curtain and pressed her palm to the wall as if steadying herself. "We ain't got a cellar," she said, voice tight. "Then we make do," Call answered. Center of the cabin, low, away from windows. The children looked at their mother, then at him again, and Call felt something in his chest shift. He had not meant to step into this, not meant to be the man standing in someone else's doorway, but the storm did not ask what a man meant to do. It only asked what he would do when the moment came. Lark turned to him, and the strength came back into her eyes, mixed now with a plea she hated to show. "Why'd you stop?" she asked. "Men pass by all the time. They see this place and they look away." Call did not have an easy answer. The truth was tangled. Maybe it was the way she fought the roof like it mattered. Maybe it was the sound of the child crying. Maybe it was that he had been alone so long he forgot what it felt like to be needed, even for something as simple as a nail driven straight. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, a new sound rolled over the cabin, louder than thunder, deeper than wind. It was the roar of the twister coming closer, tearing the planes as it moved. The walls trembled, and dust sifted down from the ceiling like pale snow. The boy began to cry, small and broken, and the girl covered his ears. Lark rushed to them, pulling them tight against her, her eyes fixed on the door as if she expected it to fly open and let the sky inside. Call stepped forward and pushed the door shut hard, sliding the old wooden bar into place. He could feel the cabin shaking under the weight of the storm, could hear boards creak and nails groan. He turned back to Lark, and in that dark room, with the world roaring outside, their eyes met. The fear in hers was real, but so was the fire. The cabin gave a sudden sharp jolt, like something large had struck it from the outside. The lamp on the table toppled and shattered, plunging the room into deeper shadow. The children screamed, and Lark held them tighter. Call took one step toward the center of the cabin, then froze as a crack split across the front wall, letting a thin blade of stormlight slash into the room. The roar rose higher. And Call realized, with a cold weight in his gut, that the roof he had just nailed down might not be the only thing trying to come apart. The roar pressed in on the cabin like a living thing, beating against the walls and roof until the boards groaned in protest. Dust filled the air, stinging the eyes and settling on skin like fine grit. Call planted his boots wide and braced himself near the center beam, one hand gripping a post, the other hovering close to Lark and the children without touching them. He did not know if the walls would hold, only that standing still felt better than waiting helpless. Lark crouched low with the children wrapped in her arms. The girl buried her face in her mother's shoulder, shaking. The boy's cries came in sharp bursts, then faded into hiccuped breaths as Lark murmured steady words meant to calm them both. Her voice stayed firm even when fear threatened to break it, and Call noticed how carefully she chose her tone, like a woman used to holding herself together for the sake of others. The cabin shuddered again. Something struck the side hard, maybe a loose board or a chunk of fence carried on the wind. The sound made the children gasp. Call leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Hold on," he said. It won't last forever. He did not know if that was true. Out here, storms had their own minds. The twister's voice climbed to a terrible peak, then shifted, sliding past like a freight train changing tracks. The pressure eased, though the wind still howled and rain hammered the roof. After a long stretch that felt like hours, the shaking softened into a steady rattle. The worst had passed, but the danger had not gone far. Lark lifted her head slowly. Her eyes searched the dim room, the cracked wall, the ceiling above. When she was sure the cabin still stood, she let out a breath she had been holding too long. The children stayed close, clinging as if the ground itself might disappear. Call straightened, rolling his shoulders. His muscles ached from tension. He glanced toward the door, then the window, gauging the light outside. The strange green tint had faded to gray. "I'll take a look," he said. Lark's gaze snapped to him. "Don't. I won't go far," he replied. "Just need to see what we're dealing with." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Be quick." Call slid the bar back and cracked the door open. Wind rushed in, tugging at his coat. Rain still fell, but lighter now, the sky beyond churning but less violent. He stepped onto the porch, boots sinking into wet earth. The grass lay flattened in wide arcs, pointing the path the twister had taken. Pieces of debris were scattered across the land, boards, cloth, and things he could not name. The cabin had taken a beating. One corner leaned more than before, and the roof sagged dangerously, but it still stood. Call felt a grim respect for the stubbornness of poor wood and poor nails. He returned inside and closed the door. Lark searched his face. "It's still standing," he said. "But it's worse than it was." She nodded as if she had expected no other answer. "It always is." The children relaxed a little, though they stayed close. The girl studied Call with open curiosity now, her fear tempered by the calm that followed survival. The boy peeked from behind Lark's arm, eyes still wary. "Thank you," Lark said quietly. Call tipped his head. "You're welcome?" Silence settled in the cabin, broken only by the fading storm sounds and the crackle of embers in the hearth. In that quiet, the weight of what had almost happened pressed down on them all. Call felt it in the way Lark's shoulders sagged now that she could afford to let them. He looked around the small space. There was little here. A rough table, 2 chairs that did not match, a narrow bed pushed against one wall. Supplies were scarce, arranged carefully as if counted more than once. This was not a place built on comfort. It was built on endurance. "You live out here alone?" Call asked. Lark stiffened at the word alone. "With them," she said, tightening her hold on the children. "That's enough," he nodded, understanding that it was not the full answer. "Ain't easy ground." "No," she agreed. "But it's what I've got?" The girl shifted and looked up at her mother. "Is it gone?" "For now," Lark said. "You did good, both of you." The children clung a moment longer, then slowly loosened their grip. The girl sat back on her heels, brushing dust from her skirt. The boy wiped his nose on his sleeve. They were tough in the quiet way children had to be when life gave them no other choice. Call cleared his throat. "You said brother earlier." Lark's jaw tightened. "They're mine," she said. "That's all that matters." Call raised his hand slightly. "I ain't questioning that." She studied him, measuring his words. "People like to ask questions. They think they got a right. Townfolk," he guessed. A bitter edge crept into her expression. "Townfolk don't come this far unless they're lost or looking for trouble. When they do, they stare like we're some kind of warning." Call thought of the old west town a few miles back, with its false front buildings and eyes always watching. He had felt that stare himself, even as a grown man. "You from there?" he asked. She shook her head. "We passed through once." That was enough. The rain eased further, leaving a heavy dampness in the air. The storm had moved on, but its presence lingered, like a threat not fully spoken. Call leaned against the post again, feeling the fatigue settle into his bones. "You got family nearby?" he asked, though he suspected the answer. Lark looked at the hearth, at the low flames licking the last of the wood. "Not anymore." The words fell flat, stripped of emotion by overuse. Call understood that too. Some losses hurt so long they went numb. He hesitated, then spoke. "You ain't got to tell me." She glanced up, surprise flickering across her face. "Most men don't say that." "I ain't most men," he replied. That earned him a short, humorless smile. "No," she said. "I don't think you are—" The children grew restless now that the danger had passed. The girl began straightening a small pile of cloth, folding it with care. The boy wandered to the door and pressed his face to the crack, peering out at the wet world beyond. Call watched them, something tight twisting in his chest. He had seen children like this before, raised by hardship instead of ease. He had been one himself once. "You got a name, miss?" The girl asked suddenly, looking at him with open interest. Before Call could answer, Lark spoke. "Mind your manners. It's all right," Call said. "I told your ma, Call." The girl nodded solemnly. "I'm Fern." The boy glanced back. "Ash," he said, barely above a whisper. Call tipped his hat to them both. "Good to meet you." They studied him as if committing his face to memory, then went back to their small tasks. Lark watched the exchange, something like worry in her eyes. "You shouldn't get them used to you," she said softly. Call met her gaze. "I ain't planning to stay." The lie tasted thin even as he said it. He did not know what he planned. He only knew the road outside felt less certain than it had an hour ago. Lark seemed to accept his words, though doubt lingered. People come and go, she said. That's the way of it. Call nodded. I know. He moved toward the window, careful of the cracked wall. Outside, the land lay battered but alive. Clouds still churned, but light began to seep through in pale bands. The twister had spared the cabin by chance or mercy, but next time might not be so kind. You can't stay here long, Call said. Lark's back stiffened. We've stayed this long, and it nearly took you, he replied, not unkindly. Another storm like that, and this place won't hold. She turned on him, anger flashing. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't counted the boards and mails and days? I think you're doing the best you can, Call said. But best ain't always enough. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken things. Lark looked away first, jaw working. This land was my husband's, she said finally. He chose it. Said it was far enough from town, far enough from trouble. Call felt the weight of the word husband settle in the room. Was. She nodded. He went west one winter and didn't come back. Folks said the trail was bad. Snow, hunger, maybe worse. Out here there's always worse. I'm sorry, Call said. She gave a small shrug. Sorry don't bring a man home. No, he agreed. Fern glanced up. Pa said the land would keep us safe. Lark swallowed. Your pa believed a lot of things. The girl felt quiet, absorbing that in her careful way. Call felt like an intruder now, standing amid a grief that was not his to share. Yet he could not shake the sense that their stories had brushed too close to his own. He had lost people too, to distance, to time, to choices he could not undo. He had learned the land did not care about promises. You didn't ask about me, he said, half to change the air. Lark looked at him. You said you were a drifter. That's what folks call it, he replied. I had a place once, ranch south of here. Dried up after a run of bad seasons. My brother took sick. I buried him under a cottonwood and rode out. She studied his face, seeing the truth in the lines there. You didn't stay? There wasn't anything left to stay for, he said. The words echoed in the small cabin, heavy with meaning. Lark looked away, understanding too much. The rain slowed to a mist. Outside, a bird called, tentative, testing the air after chaos. Life, stubborn as ever, pushed forward. Call straightened. I should get moving before dark. Lark's eyes flicked to the sky, then back to him. Road'll be rough. I've ridden worse. She hesitated, then spoke. You could stay till morning. Let the ground settle. The offer hung between them, fragile. Call felt the pull of it, the warmth of shelter and company after too many nights alone, but he also felt the weight of what staying might mean. I don't want to be trouble, he said. Lark met his gaze, steady. Trouble finds us whether we invite it or not. The children looked between them, sensing something important without understanding it. Fern clutched Ash's hand. Another distant rumble rolled across the plain, not thunder this time, but something deeper, like the land itself shifting. Call glanced toward the door. Storm might circle back, he said. Lark nodded slowly. It always does. They stood there, 4 souls bound by chance and weather, each carrying scars the storm could not wash away. Outside, the light faded as evening crept in, and with it came the quiet threat of what the night might bring. The evening light slipped low and thin across the plains, turning the wet grass into dull copper. The storm clouds broke apart in places, but the sky still held a bruised look, like it might remember its anger and return. Call sat on a rough stool near the hearth, not too close, not too far. Lark kept to the table, wiping rainwater off a tin cup with a cloth that had been mended more times than it should have been. Fern and Ash settled near the fire, quiet now, their shoulders still tight with leftover fear. No one spoke for a while. The silence was not empty. It was crowded with thoughts nobody wanted to lay out where the others could see them. Call listened to the cabin as it cooled. The boards creaked, settling after the storm. Somewhere above, a loose section of roof clicked softly in the wind. He kept thinking of how it had shuddered when the twister passed, how close that cracked wall had come to giving in. He had lived in places that shook and groaned before, but this was different because there were children here, and a woman who had been standing alone against the sky like she was made of iron. Lark set the cup down and finally spoke, voice careful. You can take the bed. Call looked up. No. It's the only bed, she said flatly, as if stating a fact ended all argument. I'll sleep on the floor, he replied. Her eyes narrowed. Pride's a poor blanket. It ain't pride, he said. Just sense. You and the young'uns need it more. Lark's mouth tightened like she wanted to argue further, but Fern shifted closer to Ash, and Lark's gaze softened. She turned away, taking a pot from the shelf. There's stew, thin, but warm. Call stood. Let me help. She paused, then shook her head. I don't need help stirring a pot. I wasn't thinking of stirring, he said. I was thinking of hauling water, splitting wood, patching that roof before night swallows us. Her shoulders tensed. And why would you do that? Call answered honestly. Because if I leave you like this, I'll be thinking on it every mile. Lark's hand stilled on the pot. She did not look at him right away. When she did, the hard edge in her eyes was mixed with something else, something close to fear. Men don't do things without wanting something, she said. Call nodded slowly. You've had men take more than they gave. The words fell between them like a stone dropped in a shallow well. Fern looked up, startled, then dropped her gaze to the floor. Ash went still, watching his mother. Lark's face hardened, but her voice stayed low. I've had men make promises, she said, then leave when the promise got heavy. Call held her gaze. I ain't here with promises. That's worse, she whispered. Because promises are at least something a body can hold in their hands for a while. Call had no answer for that. He turned toward the door. I'm going to check the roof anyway, he said. If you want me gone after, you can tell me so. He stepped outside before she could reply. The air smelled of wet earth and torn grass. The plain stretched wide and lonely, and the sky, though calmer, still carried a restless feel. Call walked around the cabin, checking the posts, the corner that leaned, the cracked wall. He found the gap where the boards had split and pressed his fingers into it. The wood was damp and soft from age. It would not take much to open that crack wider. He climbed onto the roof again, moving carefully. The boards he had nailed earlier held, but other sections had lifted. He worked by fading light, hammering where he could, cursing under his breath when a nail bent. He did not have enough nails. He had maybe enough strength for one more hard season in his body, and even that was not certain. When he climbed down, his hands were raw and wet, and his shoulders ached. But the roof looked steadier. Not safe, not truly, but steadier. He stood in the yard a moment, listening. Far off, he heard a faint sound that did not belong to the storm. Hooves, maybe, or the distant creak of a wagon. The plane carried sounds strange sometimes. He turned his head, scanning the horizon. Nothing moved that he could see, but the feeling of being watched pricked the back of his neck. Call returned inside and shut the door firmly behind him. Lark had poured stew into tin bowls. The smell was simple, but good, the kind of food that did not pretend to be more than it was. Fern handed a bowl to Call without speaking. Her eyes were serious, as if she had decided he was either safe or not, and the decision mattered. Call took the bowl and nodded. Thank you. Ash watched him take the first bite, as if waiting to see if a stranger eating their food would bring bad luck. They ate in near silence. The stew warmed Call's belly and loosened some of the cold in his bones. He noticed Lark barely touched hers. She kept watching the children, making sure they ate enough. You ain't hungry? Call asked. I'm fine, she said. He did not believe her, but he did not press. After the bowls were empty, Fern gathered them and washed them with a little water, careful not to waste a drop. Lark moved to the hearth and added a small piece of wood, making the fire last without burning too bright. She kept glancing at the window, toward the dimming land outside. Call sat back on the stool. You expect someone? Lark's hands froze. No, but her voice was too quick. Call studied her, then the children. Town's close enough to hear about a storm, he said. If you got trouble, it'll find you sooner or later. Fern stiffened and Ash moved closer to her. Lark stood, turning to face Call. You don't know what you're saying, she said sharply. I know enough to read the air, Call replied. You're not just afraid of weather. Lark's eyes flashed, then softened, then flashed again like she was fighting herself. She looked at the children and lowered her voice. There's a man in town, she said at last. He says this land belongs to him. Call felt his jaw tighten. And does it? It was my husband's claim, Lark said. He worked it. He filed it, he built this cabin. But when he didn't come back, folks started talking like his name was already fading. That man, Call said, voice low. What's his name? Lark hesitated. They call him Brask. Call did not like the sound of it. Names carried weight. That one carried the kind that crushed. He's a trader, Lark continued. Owns a storehouse, moves cattle, lends money. Smiles like he's doing you kindness while he ties a rope around your neck. Fern's hands clenched around the cloth she was folding. Ash swallowed hard. What does he want? Call asked, though he already guessed. He wants the land, Lark said. And he wants me to sign a paper saying I give it up. And you won't. I can't, she whispered. If I do, where do we go? Back to town where they look at us like we're dirt? To some camp where men drink and stare? I'd rather fight the storms. Call leaned forward. Has he come out here? Lark's eyes dropped. Twice. Call's chest tightened. And? Lark's fingers trembled. He didn't hurt the children, she said quickly, like she needed to say it out loud to keep it true. He just stood in the doorway and talked like he owned the air. He said I had a week. Said after that he'd bring men. Call felt anger rise, hot and steady. You should have gone to the law. Lark let out a short laugh with no joy. The law drinks in his saloon. The law owes him money. Call's hands curled into fists, then relaxed. He forced himself to breathe. He had seen this before in too many places, where a man with papers and friends could steal what another man had bled for. Why didn't you leave? Call asked, softer now. Lark lifted her chin. Because my husband promised, she said. He promised this place would be ours. He promised the children would grow up with a roof and ground under them that belonged to them. I can't let that promise die just because he did. The words landed hard. Call looked at the children. Fern stared at the floor, lips pressed tight. Ash's eyes shone in the firelight. Call understood broken promises. He had lived in their shadow. Outside, the wind shifted again. The cabin gave a small creak. Lark flinched, then steadied herself. Call spoke carefully. If Brass comes with men, this cabin won't stand against it. Lark's eyes hardened. Then I'll stand. Call held her gaze. That ain't bravery. That's a death wish. Her voice rose, then dropped, fierce and shaking. You think I don't know the odds? Every day I wake up and I know I could lose everything before sundown, but I wake up anyway. Because those two, she nodded at the children, need someone who doesn't quit. The room fell quiet again, thick with the truth of it. Call looked away first, staring into the fire. He saw his own brother there, thin and pale, coughing in a small cabin while Call told him the ranch would recover, told him they'd make it. Promises meant to keep a man alive a little longer. Promises that did not always come true. He felt the old guilt stir. He had left. He had ridden away when the ground turned against him. Lark had stayed. Call lifted his head. What do you want from me? He asked. Lark stared at him as if he had spoken in a foreign tongue. I don't want anything. That ain't true, Call said gently. You want safety. You want time. You want a chance for those young'uns to grow without fear? Lark's throat worked. She turned her face away, blinking hard. Fern stepped closer to her mother. Ma, she whispered. Lark reached down and squeezed her shoulder. I'm here, she murmured. Call watched that small touch, the way it steadied Fern. He felt a pull in his chest, so sharp it nearly hurt. He had forgotten what it looked like, a family holding itself together with nothing but will. The night deepened. The fire burned low. Call could feel sleep tugging at him, but his mind stayed alert, turning over what Lark had said. Brask? A week. Men? Call stood. I'll sleep near the door, he said. If someone comes, I'll hear it. Lark's eyes narrowed again, but her voice was quieter. You don't have to. I do, Call replied. Fern and Ash moved toward the bed, curling together like pups in a den. Lark sat on the edge, smoothing Fern's hair back, then Ash's. Her face softened in a way it had not earlier, and in that moment she looked younger, less like a woman carved out of hardship and more like someone who had once believed in gentle things. Call turned his gaze away, giving her that privacy. When the children's breathing evened out, Lark rose and crossed the room. She paused near Call, who was settling on the floor with his coat folded under his head. "You can't fix this," she said softly. Call looked up at her. In the dim light, her eyes shone like dark water. "I'm not trying to fix your life," he replied. "I'm just trying to keep the storm from taking more than it already has." Her mouth trembled, the smallest sign of emotion slipping free. She swallowed it down. "Men like Brask don't scare easy," she whispered. "They don't stop because a stranger says no." Call held her gaze. "I ain't easy to scare either." Lark studied him a long moment, as if weighing whether to believe that. Then she stepped back, her bare feet quiet on the worn boards. Call lay there, listening to the cabin breathe, the wind outside, the children's soft sounds and sleep. He felt the distance of the planes pressing in, but also felt something else, a closeness he had not allowed himself in a long time. Love was not a word he dared to think. Not yet, but he could feel the shape of it somewhere in the dark, fragile as a flame in a storm. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time moved strange in the night. Then Call heard it. A faint creak outside, not the settling of boards, not the groan of wind, the sound of leather, the soft snort of a horse. His eyes snapped open. He rose silently, hand closing around the hammer. Lark was already sitting up on the bed, awake like she had never truly slept. Their eyes met across the dim room. She whispered, barely moving her lips. "Brask?" Call did not answer. He moved toward the door, each step careful, keeping his breath quiet. Outside, another sound, low voices carried by the damp air. Call pressed his ear to the wood. A man chuckled softly, close enough to make Call's skin go cold. "Still standing," the voice said. "Stubborn woman." Call's grip tightened on the hammer. Behind him, Lark's whisper trembled. "Don't." Call did not turn. He stared at the bar across the door, knowing how easy it would be for men to break it if they wanted. The voice outside continued, calm as if this was all a game. "Open up, Lark," it said. "You got company tonight." Call's heart pounded, but his body stayed still. Lark held her breath, eyes wide in the dark, torn between fear and fury. And Call understood, with a heavy certainty, that the storm had only been the beginning. The knock did not come right away. That was what made it worse. The voice outside lingered in the air like smoke, sure of itself, patient. Call stayed by the door, feeling the grain of the wood under his palm, listening to the shallow breaths behind him. The children were awake now. He could hear it in the way the bed creaked as Fern shifted, in the sharp little inhale Ash tried to hide. Lark rose slowly from the bed. Her bare feet made no sound on the floor. She moved to the children first, crouching beside them, one hand on each small shoulder. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned steady. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "No matter what," Fern nodded, lips pressed tight. Ash clutched her sleeve, eyes round. Call watched Lark straighten and walk toward him. She stopped a step away, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her, the tension held tight in her body like a drawn wire. "This is my fight," she whispered. Call shook his head once. "Not tonight." Before she could answer, the knock came, slow, measured, 3 taps that carried authority without force. "Lark," the voice called again, pleasant as ever. "Storm past. Figured you might need a friendly face?" Call leaned closer to the door. "Go on," he said quietly. "Tell him to leave." Her jightened. "Men like him don't leave when asked." The voice outside chuckled again. "I hear movement in there. You got yourself company." "That don't change a thing." Call felt anger flare, sharp and clean. He slid the bar free and opened the door just enough to step outside, keeping his body between the opening and the room beyond. Rain dripped from the eaves. 2 horses stood in the yard, their riders mounted and relaxed like they had all the time in the world. One man sat straight-backed, well-fed, coat clean despite the storm. His eyes were small and watchful, his smile thin. The other leaned in his saddle, older, harder, eyes flat. The smiling man tipped his hat. "Evening." "Didn't know Lark was entertaining?" Call met his gaze. "You got business here?" The man's eyes flicked over Call, measuring him like a tool. "That depends." "You kin?" "No, friend." Call did not answer. The man smiled wider. "Then you're standing on borrowed ground. This land don't belong to you," Call said. The man's smile did not fade. "Paper says otherwise." "I brought it if you'd like a look." Lark's voice came from the doorway behind Call, steady but tight. I told you I won't sign. The man turned his horse slightly, looking past Call at her. I was hoping you'd reconsider. Storms have a way of changing minds. Call shifted his weight, planting his boots firm in the mud. You're done here, the older rider spat into the grass. Hear that, Brask? Stranger thinks he runs things. Brask lifted a hand, silencing him. Easy, no need to rush. His gaze stayed on Call. You don't look like a fool. Walk away. Let this stay between me and the widow. Call felt Lark tense behind him. He could feel the children's fear like a weight pressing into his back. He thought of the cracked wall, the thin roof, the small hands clinging to hope. I am walking, Call said. Brask studied him longer this time. You got a pass, Drifter? Call did not answer. Brask nodded slowly. We all do. Thing is, past catches up. So does debt. Call felt Lark's hand brush his arm, a warning, a plea. Brask's smile thinned. I'll give you till morning, he said. After that, papers or not, this place changes hands. Storm or no storm. He tipped his hat again, then turned his horse. The older man followed. Hoofs thudded soft into the wet grass as they rode off into the dark. Call stood there until the sound faded. Only then did he close the door and slide the bar back into place. The cabin felt smaller now, the air tighter. Lark rounded on him, voice shaking. Why did you do that? Call faced her. Because he was coming whether I stood there or not. You don't know him, she hissed. You don't know what he'll do. I know enough, Call replied. And I know this. If he comes back with men, you can't be here. Silence hit hard. Fern let out a small sound, half protest, half fear. Lark's eyes flashed. This is our home. And it won't be if he burns it down, Call said. Her breath hitched. She turned away, hands pressed to the table, shoulders shaking once before she mastered herself. When she turned back, her face was set like stone. You don't get to decide for us, she said. Call stepped closer, lowering his voice. I ain't deciding. I'm telling you the truth. She shook her head. The truth is, running never saved anyone I loved. The words struck deep. Call felt his chest tighten. He thought of his brother again, of leaving, of promises spoken too late. I ran, he said quietly. And I paid for it every mile after. Lark stared at him, startled by the admission. I won't run now, Call continued. But I won't let you stand here and lose everything either. Fern stepped forward. Ma, she whispered. I'm scared, Lark's resolve cracked. She knelt, pulling Fern and Ash close, pressing her face into their hair. Call turned away, giving her that moment, though every instinct screamed that time was running thin. When Lark rose again, her eyes were wet but clear. If we leave, she said, voice breaking, we don't come back. Call nodded. I know. She swallowed hard. Where would we go? Call hesitated. There's an old mission west of here. Half fallen but solid stone. I passed it last winter. No one claims it. Storms can't tear it down easy. Lark studied him. You expect us to trust you. I expect you to trust the walls, Call said. And the chance. The children looked between them, hope and fear tangled together. Outside, the wind rose again, rattling the loose boards. The storm had not fully left. It circled, waiting. Lark looked around the cabin, at the walls her husband had raised. The table scarred by years of use, the bed where the children slept. Her hand trembled as she touched the cracked wall. He promised, she whispered. Call stepped closer. Promises don't keep the roof up, he said gently. People do. She closed her eyes, breathing hard. When she opened them, a decision sat there heavy and painful. We leave at first light, she said. Before he comes back, Call nodded. I'll saddle the horses. We'll take what we can carry. Fern clutched her mother's skirt. What about Pa's things? Lark knelt again, smoothing her hair. We take what matters. The night stretched long after that. They moved quietly, gathering what little they had. A blanket, a tin of flour, a small bundle of clothes. Lark wrapped a few keepsakes in cloth, her hands lingering on each one like a farewell. Call stepped outside to check the horses. The sky was clearing now, stars pushing through the clouds, sharp and cold. He felt the weight of the coming dawn press down on him. Leaving meant safety. It also meant surrendering a piece of themselves to a man who did not deserve it. As Call tightened the saddle cinch, a sound carried across the plain, hooves more than two. His pulse jumped. He moved to the edge of the yard, scanning the dark. Lantern light bobbed in the distance, closer than before. Call hurried back inside. "They're coming," he said low. Lark's head snapped up. "Now?" Call nodded. More of them. Fear rippled through the room. Fern clutched Ash. Lark stood very still, then moved with sudden purpose. "Out the back," she said. "Now." Call grabbed the bundles, slinging them over his shoulder. He ushered the children toward the rear door. The lantern light grew brighter through the cracks in the front wall. As they slipped out into the dark, a shout rang out. "Lark!" Brask's voice again, closer now, sharper. Call pushed the children ahead toward the horses. Lark followed, then stopped, turning back toward the cabin. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't leave it to him." Call grabbed her arm. "You have to," she pulled free, tears streaking her face. "This is all I have left of him." Lantern light flared around the front of the cabin. Voices rose, men dismounting. Call looked at the children, then at Lark, torn between them, his heart hammered. Every choice felt wrong. Every second burned away precious time. Brask's shadow crossed the front window. "Don't make this harder," his voice called. "Come out." Call stepped between Lark and the cabin, eyes locked on hers. "If you go back in there," he said, voice breaking, "you won't come out." The children cried softly, clinging to each other. Lark's breath shook. She looked at the cabin one last time, at the life she was about to lose. Then the front door crashed open. Lantern light flooded the room. Men's voices filled the air. Call turned toward the sound, hammer raised, knowing the moment had come where fear and choice collided. Behind him, Lark gasped, and the night seemed to hold its breath as everything threatened to break at once. The lantern light spilled across the cabin like fire, sharp and unforgiving. Call stepped forward without thinking, planting himself between the doorway and the woman and children behind him. His grip tightened on the hammer, not as a weapon he wanted to use, but as the last thing he had to offer the night. Brask stood in the doorway, framed by two men behind him. Rainwater glistened on their coats. The storm had scrubbed the land clean, but it had not washed away cruelty. "Well," Brask said mildly, eyes sliding past Call to Lark, "looks like you were fixing to leave." Lark's chest rose and fell hard. She took one step forward, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "We're done here. You've got what you wanted." "We're going," Brask smiled, slow and thin. "You don't get to decide that." Call shifted his weight, meeting Brask's gaze. "She does." Brask looked Call up and down, then sighed as if bored. "I gave you till morning. You came early," Call replied. "Plans change." Brask's eyes hardened. "Step aside." "No." The word landed heavy and final. For a moment the world balanced on the edge of that refusal. The men behind Brask tensed. Fern whimpered softly. Ash buried his face in her shoulder. Then something unexpected happened. A voice came from outside, sharp and clear. "That's far enough." Brask's head snapped around. Lantern light swung, revealing shapes in the dark. 3 riders stood at the edge of the yard, their horses calm, their rifles held loose but ready. One man rode forward, older, his coat patched but clean, his eyes steady. Brask cursed under his breath. "Marshal," he said. The marshal dismounted slowly. "Evening, Brask. Storm didn't wash you away, I see." Brask straightened. "This is private business." The marshal's gaze slid to the cabin, to Lark, to the children huddled behind Call. His mouth tightened. "Doesn't look private to me," Brask scoffed. "That land's mine. Papers filed." The marshal nodded. "Saw the paper, also saw the claim filed before it. Name on it didn't disappear just because the man did." Brask's smile faltered. "That man's dead." "Maybe," the marshal said. "Maybe not. No body, no proof. And even if he is, his wife's got rights." Brask's jaw worked. "You've been drinking in my saloon for years, and I've been watching you," the marshal replied. "Tonight you pushed too far." The older man behind Brask shifted. "This ain't worth it." Brask glanced at his men, then back at the marshal. His eyes flicked to Call, cold and measuring. "You think this changes anything?" The marshal stepped closer. "It changes tonight. And tomorrow we'll sort the rest proper." Silence stretched. Brask's face hardened, then smoothed. He tipped his hat toward Lark, mock polite. "Enjoy your victory," he said. "They don't last long out here." He turned and strode away. His men followed. The lantern light retreated into the dark. The tension drained from the cabin all at once. Fern let out a sob she had been holding too long. Ash clung to her, shaking. Lark sank onto the bench, strength finally leaving her. Call turned toward her, his hammer slipping from his hand to the floor with a dull thud. The marshal stepped inside, removing his hat. "You all right?" Lark nodded, tears streaming freely now. "Yes, thanks to him." She looked at Call. The marshal studied Call, then nodded once. "You stood your ground." Call shrugged, exhaustion washing over him. "Seemed the right thing." The marshal looked at the children. "You got kin in town?" Lark shook her head. "No." "Then you'll come stay near the mission," the marshal said. "It's safer ground." "I'll see to it Brass keeps his distance." Lark hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Thank you." The marshal left them then, his riders fading into the night. The cabin felt quiet in a new way, emptied of threat. Call helped Lark steady herself. His hand lingered on her arm, gentle, unsure. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yes," he replied, "I did." Dawn came slow and pale. They did not sleep much. When the first light crept over the plains, Call saddled the horses while Lark wrapped the last of their belongings. She stood in the doorway a long moment, looking back at the cabin. Call waited, not rushing her. She turned away at last. The ride west was quiet. The land rolled gentle now, washed clean, the air cool and fresh. The mission rose from the earth like a promise kept, stone walls worn but strong. They settled there slowly, carefully, like people afraid to believe in safety. Days passed. Then weeks. The marshal kept his word. Brask did not return. Word drifted through the plains that his papers were questioned, his dealings watched. He faded into the background like a bad dream losing its hold. Call stayed. At first, he told himself it was temporary. A roof needed fixing, a fence needed mending. Then Fern laughed at something he said, bright and sudden, and Ash followed him everywhere with questions. Lark watched him work, trust growing in her eyes like new grass after rain. One evening, as the sun sank low, Lark joined Call outside the mission wall. The plain stretched wide and calm. "I never thank you properly," she said. Call looked at her. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," she replied. "That's why it matters." They stood in silence, the kind that felt full instead of empty. "I was afraid," Lark said quietly. "Afraid to hope again," Call nodded. "So was I." She met his gaze. "What happens now?" Call took a breath. "We keep going. One day at a time." She smiled then, small but real. "I think I'd like that." The wind moved through the grass, soft and steady. The land no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like something that could be lived with. That night the mission held warmth and quiet laughter. Fern slept easy. Ash dreamed without fear. Lark sat by the fire, Call beside her, their shoulders touching, no words needed. Outside, the stars burned clear and bright. The old West did not give peace freely. It had to be earned, fought for, held on to with both hands. But sometimes, if a person stayed long enough and stood firm enough, it gave back something rare, a place to belong.